What's going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners, and we got to talk about some tight ends for Week 8. Who are we going to sit? Who are we going to get into our lineup? Last week's accuracy report, almost 70%, sitting at 67% last week. Man, Hunter Henry, bro. Those touchdowns going to other tight ends. What's up with that? Robert Tonyan not getting a whole lot of work either. Logan Thomas had him as a sit last week. He ends up hitting. I even said in that video, I feel like I should start him. Should have just went with the gut, but I didn't. That's all right. No worries there. Hey, we're bouncing back now. It's time to get into Week 8 so we can make the right calls so we can get back over that 70% mark. Let's jump into it with our first matchup on Thursday Night Football. Atlanta at Carolina on Thursday Night Football. And Hayden Hurst, I'm starting to move a little bit more towards him being a start now moving forward. One of the reasons why is since the change there at head coach, it seems like they are trying to get him a little bit more involved in the game plan. It looks like he's been having some looks his way more frequently over the last couple of weeks. That could continue going up against Carolina as well this week on Thursday night. And for Ian Thomas, he's in a matchup where you want to start him. Okay, Atlanta gives up the most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, but he only has one target each of the last 3 games. And like I've said before, they don't include the tight end in their game plan here. So Ian Thomas doesn't really have any weekly upside. Could he score a touchdown this week? Absolutely. I mean, all he needs to do is catch 3 balls, score a touchdown, and I'm wrong on him. But do you really want to risk it? He's not a guy that's being involved that often. We'll go ahead and skip on him this week, even in a great matchup, and we'll take a look elsewhere. Pittsburgh at Baltimore, and Eric Ebron to me is actually an interesting option this week, and one that I looked over a couple of different times. I actually kind of like the matchup for him this week. However, I think Pittsburgh's going to handle business. I just don't see the Baltimore Ravens really making this a game where they get out into such a lead that Pittsburgh has to throw over and over and over again. Now, are they going to throw it quite a bit? Yeah, more than likely. And Ben's going to end up going towards Juju, Chase, or Deontay Johnson. A lot more than he's going to go to Eric Ebron. So more than likely, again, I believe that there might be an early game lead here. And when that early game lead establishes itself further into the game, to the second half, more James Conner. So just not enough upside for Eric Ebron for me this week. And for Mark Andrews, we're going to start him. And I see a lot of questions about him. Should you play him? Should you get rid of him? What should you do? If you own Mark Andrews, you play him. He's got way too much touchdown upside every single week. He's the number 1 option for Lamar Jackson. And in a matchup like this where Pittsburgh's going to be throwing the ball quite a bit at least to start and could end up putting up a decent lead on them, Mark Andrews has to be out there because he has far too much touchdown upside this week not to be in your lineup. The Rams in Miami, and for Los Angeles, I tell you what, this tight end position to me has been a mystery. It seems like every single week, and it was even more of a mystery last week when all of a sudden Tyler Higbee ended up missing the game. That put Gerald Everett in a position to, have a pretty decent game. And if you saw me on Twitter right before the game when I found out Higbee was going to be out, I changed Everett over to a start. Like the touchdown upside, he ends up doing exactly that and scoring a touchdown. We're going to go back to Gerald Everett as a start this week if Higbee is out. Now, if both of them end up playing this week, I probably will end up sitting both of them. Miami does allow the second fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. And when both of these guys are healthy and on the field, they take away from each other far too much. And because of that, I'll end up skipping on both of them if they end up being healthy and raring to go. Now, for Miami, Mike Gesicki, he is going to be a start for me this week. I'm not liking the wide receiver situation for them, okay? The Los Angeles Rams allow the second fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, but they allow over 14 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Mike Gesicki could end up being a guy this week that Tua really has to rely on. With the matchup that the wide receivers have, with how difficult that could be, Tua may have to look to Mike Gesicki quite a bit. So the volume should be there this week. Now, is the upside there? I hope it is, but he's going to have to find the end zone for that. So fingers crossed they can actually move the ball down the field, get into the red zone, and Mike Gesicki can find his way in there for 6. The Jets and the Chiefs, and there's not really much to say here other than we're sitting Chris Herndon and Ryan Griffin, and we're playing Travis Kelce. It's really as simple as that. With Chris Herndon, this is a matchup that actually I would look at and I would say, hey, perfect matchup, Chris Herndon. Get him in your lineup. Adam Gase doesn't believe so. Adam Gase, I don't even think really realizes that he has tight ends on the team. I don't even think Adam Gase realizes he's a head coach sometimes. But this is not for me to figure out. It's not my problem. The Jets need a new coach, and when they do, maybe Chris Herndon becomes a start at that point. He's not right now, but Travis Kelce is and always will be. The Packers allow the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, and even though I'd like to go back to Irv Smith Jr. after over the past couple of weeks before the bye, he looked like he was starting to get going a little bit, and they might start including him a little bit more. But in a tough matchup like this, I just can't force myself back into Irv Smith Jr. this quickly. And some easier matchups down the road, absolutely, we could end up being on board with him, and then at that point, get him into our lineup. Now with Green Bay, what are we going to be doing with Green Bay? Because right now, Robert Tonyan's the question, okay? I'm going to go ahead and start him again this week. Yeah, he hasn't been great the last 2 games, but Aaron Rodgers still doesn't have a consistent number 2. MVS is way too up and down. Is Aaron Jones going to be able to play this week? If he is, yeah, it's a lot better for him. Maybe Jamal Williams gets a little bit of work in the passing game. Jones as well. But, you know, with Devontae Adams, if he's in the lineup, if he's on the field, really everyone around him loses a whole lot of weekly upside. But again, when you're lacking that second option and you're going up against Minnesota, you might have to throw against a little bit. And that week 1 matchup, a lot of back and forth, push to the very end. Green Bay wins it. But Robert Tonyan, man, I have to go back to him this week. I really feel like that Green Bay, if they're going to win this game and be successful, he's going to have to be included in the game plan because Devontae Adams by himself, I don't think can win this matchup. Indianapolis and Detroit, and Trey Burton's going to be a start for me this week. When you look at the Detroit Lions and their fantasy points against at the tight end position, they're not allowing that much. Bottom 5 in terms of most fantasy points allowed. So they're really stifling the tight end position right now. But they haven't faced a whole lot of guys either. And they faced Hayden Hurst last week, and he didn't have that bad of a week. Now, if he would have scored a touchdown, it would have been a pretty big week for him. But really, it did end up being a great week in terms of fantasy output. But Trey Burton's a guy that they have been trying to get going extensively over the last couple of weeks. And I've kind of been hinting at that leading into it. And then all of a sudden, boom, here he is. He was a start a couple of weeks ago, had a really good game. Now going up against Detroit, with the way the offense is structured right now, tight end is really influential for them in terms of pushing the ball down the field and scoring points. Now for Detroit, TJ Hawkinson definitely is going to be a sit for me. He's been inconsistent at best this year, and even when he runs into a good matchup like he did with Atlanta last week, it took a 4th quarter TD to really make him any type of a fantasy asset last week. Indianapolis allowing the fewest fantasy points to tight end. If TJ Hawkinson was evolved a little bit more and a little bit more consistent, I would say maybe we would start him. But this week, there's just no upside. There's no reason to play him. The Las Vegas Raiders and the Browns, and you already know Darren Balls to the Waller is definitely going to be starting for us. Volume king at the tight end position, absolutely putting him in there. And then for Cleveland, right now, it does not look like Austin Hooper is going to play. And, you know, the coaching staff said he might be able to, but I just don't think that they rush it back. Last week, David Njoku was going to ended up being a start for me. Harrison Bryant wasn't even listed at the time because we didn't know Austin Hooper was going to be out until after the start and sit video came out. And then all of a sudden, Harrison Bryant hops out there on Sunday, scores a couple of touchdowns. Is Hooper out again? If he is, I like this matchup enough that Harrison Bryant coming off that big game, no Odell Beckham Jr., Baker Mayfield could be looking his way in the end zone a little bit more often. I know a lot of you feel like Jonnu Smith let you down last week, and even the best tight ends are going to have a down performance every once in a while. And last week was Smith. However, this week, Cincinnati, the 3rd most fantasy points allowed to opposing tight ends. Oh, baby, we're back on board. Let's go, Jay Smooth. Time for a big week. For Cincinnati, Drew Sample, he's going to be a sit for me. They just have stopped throwing to the tight end position, which really I don't understand. I'm assuming it's because of the emergence of T. Higgins, because to begin the year, before T. Higgins really took off, CJ Who's Your Mama was getting a lot of targets. Drew Sample, when he came in place of the injured CJ Who's Your Mama, he took a lot of targets. But they've basically disappeared since about the 2nd week, 3rd week of the season. So really moving forward, the tight end position in Cincinnati is not going to be one that we're going to be relying on too often, if ever. There's no amount of money that you could pay me to start anybody from the Patriots right now. I mean, even my James Whitelove has disappeared at this point, and that includes the tight end position. Even in a matchup that they could utilize the tight end position because the Bills really don't defend them that well, I'm not chancing it, and neither should you. As far as the Buffalo Bills go, right now Tyler Kroft. Dawson Knox, Tyler Kroft. Right now, Tyler Kroft is going to be a sit for me because, fourth fewest yards allowed by the Patriots. However, that may change because I don't know what's going to happen with the tight ends yet. Is anyone going to be cleared before this game from the COVID protocols? If they're not, and again, Tyler Kroft is the only tight end available, then at that point, we might have to reassess and put Tyler Kroft in there just because he's going to be playing so much. As of right now, a sit. We'll continue to monitor it through the week, and if anything changes, I'll let you know. The Chargers at the Broncos, and once again, Hunter Henry sees plenty of volume, but what in the world is Justin Herbert doing throwing to other tight ends? If you would have told me that there were 2 touchdowns to a tight end last week, I would have sworn Hunter Henry was the number 1 tight end overall. Virgil Green's out here catching touchdown passes. Virgil Green never does anything, and all of a sudden he's out here catching touchdown passes? Come on, Herbert, help me out here, all right? Let's get Hunter Henry on the board. Let's get him some peaks in the red zone where he excels. And let's get those fantasy points up a little bit. Let's get it done. For Denver, Noah Fant, he's back into the start column this week. Last week, you could see at times he had to come off the field. Maybe just wasn't feeling 100% healthy. I'm going to go back to him this week because I think there'll be a little bit more volume. So I'm going to put him back as a start, mainly because, too, I don't like the matchups for the wide receivers. So Noah Fant could definitely be a guy that Drew locks onto early and often. And yes, Drew locks onto. I hope you caught it. All right, moving away from that terrible dad joke, let's talk about San Francisco and Seattle. For San Francisco, again, George Kittle and Bits definitely is going to be a guy that we're starting. He's got way too much upside every single week. Now, the matchup is really good for wide receivers this week, but again, with Kittle, you're starting him. Kittle's been a little bit up and down. He's been a roller coaster this year. He's either finished as a top 5 quarterback or he's finished around tight end 15, or not quarterback, a top 5 tight end or around tight end 15. So he's really been up or down on either end of the spectrum there with the fantasy points. He's either hitting a ceiling or he's hitting well below the floor because his floor actually isn't even that low. For this week, we're going back to him though. You can't sit George Kittle. You just can't do it. And if you get one of those bad weeks, you just kind of got to shrug your shoulders and say, well, there's no one else better that I could have played over him because unless you have Travis Kelce, there isn't. However, on the other side of the football, here's the thing. The Seahawks, if you take all of their total fantasy production and put it together, if you take all their total production overall and put it together, you might have a streaming option at tight end. They're using 3 different guys though, and none of them are seeing enough volume individually to be considered playing each and every week. Now, if we started drafting tight ends for each individual team, which who knows, maybe that's something we do in the future. Instead of drafting an individual tight end, you draft the Seahawks tight ends, all of them. Interesting format there. Maybe we'll figure it out some point in time. But anyway, maybe that would be something that would work. But right now, trying to figure out any of them to start just doesn't make any sense because they all have horribly low floors and no ceilings whatsoever. The only thing that could get any of these guys into my lineup is if 2 of them were to get hurt and one of them would be the only person left to play. Is it Jimmy Graham revenge week? Okay, maybe that's pushing it a little bit too far. But New Orleans does head to Chicago for the New Orleans Saints. I'm going to list Jared Cook as a start this week because I don't know what's going on at the wide receiver position. Even today, it looks like Marquez Callaway isn't even participating in practice right now. So who's banged up, who's hurt, who's out, who's crying, who wants to be traded? Come on. It's like Beverly Hills 90210 or some other teen drama on TV there for the wide receivers because everyone's hurt, getting sick, holding. It's just a mess right now. It's just a mess there. I don't want to start any of them, especially in that type of a matchup. So more than likely, Drew Brees is going to have to look Jared Cook's way quite a bit. On the other side of the ball with Jimmy Graham, he is going to be a start against his former team. Why? Well, because he's seeing so much volume. Right now, he is one of the leaders on the team in terms of volume, not just at the tight end position, but overall. And New Orleans allows the second most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. So Jimmy Graham is a lock this week to have a really good game. I'm excited for it. To me, we're looking at top 5 tight end potential in week 8 of 2020. That's probably one of the most 2020 things I've said all year long. Dallas at Philadelphia, and for being worried about the Dallas situation, I sure do have a lot of starts there this week. But with Dalton Schultz, we got to go back to him. Why Philadelphia allows the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. We're going to be looking his way a little bit, especially if we end up going with a 3rd string quarterback there. Now, Dalton could still possibly get back this week. Not really banking on it or betting on it, but if he does, definitely could be going to Dalton Schultz on some of those intermediate routes, some of those quicker routes quite a bit, especially when you got guys like Gallup and Lamb that can stretch the field. He makes for a guy that could pick up a lot of yards after the catch. For Philadelphia, Dallas Goedert, does he even play? There's been a little bit of talk about it. I highly doubt he gets back this week. Richard Rodgers, who stepped in last week, not a bad game, but I just can't bet on it, right? Yeah, Richard Rodgers, maybe he comes close again, but unless he scores a touchdown, it's going to be a crapshoot. Now, if any tight end scores a touchdown, which last week, I believe if I heard correctly, it was the most touchdowns scored by the tight end possession on one day ever in football or something like that. So that was crazy. Last week was the week of the tight ends, and you think I would be pretty happy about that. But Richard Rodgers... Come on. I mean, we're talking about Richard Rodgers right now, okay? That's how 2020 has been. The Philadelphia Eagles, we should be talking about Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert, and we're talking about freaking Richard Rodgers. If that's not enough to get you tilted, I don't know what is. Final matchup of the week for Tampa Bay, Rob Gronkowski. We're going to go back to him as a start. The dude, I mean, he's just balling out right now. He looks like the Rob Gronkowski is old. Tom Brady has that connection with him. Those two are seeing each other. It's working right now. So we're going to go back to him as a start. And then for the New York Giants, Evan Ingram's finally a sit. It took me, 8 weeks of the season to figure it out. Not really figure it out. I knew that he was struggling, but it's just so hard when the matchups were good. However, this matchup, it isn't good. So, of course, I'm going to sit him and he's going to go off this week. That's just how 2020 has been. Just remember that next week during the start and sit video when I talk about how much I hate Evan Ingram, remember I listed him as a start or a sit this week, and he finally went ahead and had a big game. This is a really tough matchup for him, though. Tampa Bay does good against tight ends. I can't imagine that he has that much upside this week anyway. All right, Headliner Nation, there you have it. I'm going to get out of here. All of you get your lineup set and raring to go. Remember with these start and sit videos that they're used in conjunction with our rankings videos. We update a lot of information there, okay? So if you watch this video, make sure you come back later in the week for the rankings video. Headliner Nation, appreciate you all. Hit that like button if you love the content. Comment down below if you've got any questions about any tight ends that you're thinking about, and as course, have all those things. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Become a part of Headliner Nation today, over 110,000 strong. Headliner Nation, appreciate you all. Stay safe, stay healthy. I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.